Hi, I'm Tim of the 1916 Company, announcing our all-new 1916 Company app. Check out our all-new community features, including wrist time, where you can log the watch you wear, how often you wear your watches, and see a graphical representation of how you use your collection. But wait, there's more, because this wrist time feature allows you to post in real time to our live feed of user wrist shots. Our community functions also include professionally moderated discussions, all sorts of views, debate, insights into what people want to say about the watches of our times, and all your favorite features are coming back, including media, editorial from Jack Forster, video from yours truly. You can continue to build your online collection and your wish list, plus all the commercial features are back. Buy, trade, and sell through the app, browse our global inventory of pre-owned and new watches. A wrist shot could begin the process of a trade or a purchase. Find the 1916 Company app on the Apple App Store and Google.
Hello and welcome to the 1916 Company podcast. I'm Tim Masso here with Armand Johnston. Today, why watches are not stocks and the value trap. We're talking about why collecting watches is great, dealing watches is probably caveat emptor if you are buying the notion of a fast profit. So, Armand, let's just get started with a little story from when I was in high school. So, a science teacher had a friend, and the friend went out fishing with him off of Montauk. And within the first hour on the boat, they caught a giant bluefin tuna, which wound up being worth almost $100,000. A Japanese buyer was on the dock ready for it. When they landed, it was on ice. Within an hour, it was in New York City and then off to Japan on a plane. Well, this guy struck it rich. A fish worth as much as basically what a Porsche cost back then, and I mean a 911, not a Boxster.
A nice one.
Yeah. Fully optioned.
Though I love the Boxster.
The guy sold his house, sold his business, tooled up to catch bluefin tuna, and he never caught another one. So today we're talking about why watches are not stocks. I think this idea of the quick profit and the repeatable success kind of haunts everyone who's been in the space. And I'm not going to lie, we've all thought about it before. But let's just talk about some of the differences. Now, what do you tell someone who says, I'm going to trade watches, whether it's a side business or their main gig? What do you tell someone who's never done this before as a caution?
Well, I guess I asked them questions first, why? Why do you want to get into this? And, if the answer is to, I want to make a living, there's a few things that I discuss. One thing that you have to absolutely discuss is, first and foremost, trust. You want to make a living. Fantastic. So you're expecting strangers to trust you with their several $1,000 non-discretionary goods just because you're you and you do this. And truth be told, all too many guys do think that it just jumps in and you have the trust. Second of all, I would always ask, if you have several $1 million in the bank for this business venture, sure, go for it. Expect to lose for a while, but you're going to need that nest egg, that buffer to kind of back yourself. And again, I would just ask truthfully, what is your specialty going to be? What line are you going to follow in the watch industry? And ultimately, very often I would discourage people from dealing privately.
Yeah, I would say a couple things you got to think about. First of all, you may love watches, but you may find that as soon as money is involved in anything, be it real estate, cars, family relations, watches, it becomes a lot less fun. Now, I'm not telling anyone to not do this, but what we're going to explore for the next hour or so is some of the frequent pitfalls and the common pitfalls of trying to sell watches as more than just a collector who has an occasional in and out. If you're looking at this as a business, there are a whole bunch of reasons you may want to pull your punch a little bit and do some more research. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying we're going to lay out all of the challenges, including the ones we have encountered. So whether you're a flipper or a keeper, there's no denying that the allure of quick money is a tempting one. It seems impossible to exist in our hobby with at least being aware of certain people making money buying and selling. And a lot of times that giant bluefin tuna that I just mentioned, that's the one watch you sold and made a killing, or a watch a friend sold, or a friend's friend sold.
The story, the story that hooked you.
Yeah, exactly. And we've seen plenty of attempts to quantify the idea that that watches are like stocks. We've seen Morgan Stanley. They've partnered with outfits like Watch Charts. There is this attempt to pretend that the watch market is the stock market.
You know, it's so funny to me when I see Morgan Stanley write a report on the pre-owned watch market. It's BlackRock released one. A ton of investment banks.
Deloitte's done it.
Deloitte's done it a few times, actually.
Von Tobel out of Switzerland has done it.
It's remarkable, and it just shows how far into financial culture, for lack of a better phrase, watches have permeated, and non-discretionary goods.
And here's the real challenge. First of all, let's just talk about stocks. How easy is it, even if you're a day trader, and most day traders get slaughtered, but let's say you're a day trader, how easy is it to buy or sell a stock? You push a button and it happens. Go ahead and try to sell your own watch.
So logistics are a major thing. And, we live in the modern age. We live in a logistical world. If you have a logistical problem, we have a logistical solution. So we often forget in the world of Amazon, in the world of instant gratification, that we experience FedEx delays on a daily basis, and not to mention, again, we're shipping items worth thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars. But logistics are often looked over because you're spot on. There are no issues in an electronic transaction other than you making a mistake. Other than, I wouldn't even say the program would fail. There are issues and moving parts in physical goods.
And the other thing to mention is just that trying to market your watch, let's say you've got an Omega Speedmaster. How many people are trying to sell Omega Speedmasters? If you want to put that on the market and move it in less than a year on Chrono 24, you're going to have to price it substantially below market, or you're going to have to sell it wholesale to a dealer. That's how you trade time for money. You sell it to a dealer that's then going to put it on a large platform. I don't know who has the patience to wait, 6 to 12 months per watch per sale.
I certainly don't. I say all the time, I'm in this industry and I have been for a long time now. I don't even sell my own watches privately.
Yeah, when I sold my JLC collection, I realized that I would be selling these watches for the next 5 years of my life if I didn't just do some deal with a dealer. And I was close enough to a dealer that I was able to get that done pretty quickly. But could I have held out for all the money and sold those things individually? Sure, I could. But this is not like online trading of stocks. You don't push a button and the watches are gone. The liquidation, even if it's a dealer, it's going to take a few weeks. This is not a quick and easy process. Unless you are a dealer, there's not a business model there.
No, and beyond that, there's not a set price. You go and buy Apple stock. You understand the price that you're buying. You know the quote unquote product that you're getting, and you buy it at the fixed price. However, with watches, there's condition. Your Speedmaster Moonwatch with the big box that you got from Joma's shop, just like I did one time, is
I've been there.
Beautiful in your eyes. It is worth the $4,500 mid to high market in your eyes. However, the buyer is going to chisel you down to $3,650, and he's going to make you include a aftermarket strap that you wanted to keep, and you're going to cover shipping. So there is no set number at which you are going to clean on watch sales, and that is something that's true in terms of the open market. The numbers change weekly. There's no definite set.
Yeah, and that's what I always wonder when I see these watch charts prices. I'm sure they do the best they can with what's available publicly, but oftentimes you never know what the transaction price of a watch is. You might see what was asked, you don't know what it sells for. And particularly with higher end watches where sometimes the inventory is not online, or if it is, it's not listed with a price. Mm-hmm. How do you quantify this in a way that's statistically respectable, that you would trust if you were building a business around it? I think you're talking about low volume, bad data, small data, and at the very best, you're making a guess. I would say that even large-scale dealers with weird stuff like Grubel, De Bethune, Journe, call it weird, but they mostly go by auction results.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, too, the rarer you get, the more nuanced it is, and the more it's just a feeling of a watch, of a price, of a market.
Yeah, I mean, look, how do you price a DeWitt? Who knows? I mean, sometimes the markets for these things are so small you really don't know the right price. And it's very unusual if you're just a retail customer that you're somehow going to establish pricing power over other people who are trying to sell that watch. Now, if you're a dealer of some kind and you have economies of scale and existing client relationships, and you've got the logistics and the watchmaking and the service side all squared away from years of building it up, okay, then there's a business model there, but it's probably thinner margin than you think it's going to be because let's say, bulk Seamasters and Navitimers, there's just not a whole lot of margin in selling hundreds of them used per year. So most people who are thinking of selling watches, they look at selling low volume, high value type stuff. And I guess this is where we need to sort of, we'll come back to this whole idea of how do you price a watch. But it does seem there's a certain kind of collector who's drawn to the risk and excitement of watches from a gambler's perspective. And this is the other problem. When you have the overnight sensation type story of the guy who gets rich on one watch sale, there's a temptation to jump in because you think you can follow that success. But then there's also this kind of dangerous impulse, and it's a gambler's perspective. I've spoken with other people in the watch space, and it seems like there's several common traits that unify this subset of buyers and sellers. So many of them, going back to the 2000s, they were, in college, they were into the high stakes poker fad. And then after that, they were drawn to boom-bust speculative assets like meme stocks, cryptos, NFTs, and certain kinds of small-cap tech stocks. And now a lot of these people are also, this is kind of the latest trend, the same people who are into watch flipping, who think they can get ahead of the market, they're also into online gambling and app gambling. So we have this sort of serial risk taker, and we've watched him at every phase from like high school to adulthood, and now he wants to flip watches.
Without getting on a high horse and without changing the subject, I like to go to the casino. I like to lose $500,000 every now and then. Oh my gosh, I will not download a gambling app. I can't do it. It blows me away how much FanDuel has this country just by the throat. It's wild. Yeah. Sorry for that.
No. I think we'll regret legalizing sports gambling.
Too.
You can whittle away the kids, inheritance and college fund while sitting on your couch with the baby. But that's a separate issue. With watches, obviously, there's, if anything, I would say gambling is fairly structured, orderly, and easy compared to the business of selling watches. So let's just talk about how you can lose money. So we all have this idea of trading things that are valuable, and oftentimes it's collectibles. Watches are one subset of that. But let's just talk about some cars that I followed long term. So back in the 2000s, when I was in school, the peak of the market for the 1953 Buick Skylark was between $350,000 and $500,000. And that's what they were going for at auction. Now I see them going at auction for $50,000 to $100,000. So that's a car that was 20 years ago going nowhere but up. If the sky was the limit when it was 500,000, everyone was certain this thing would be alongside the Talbot Lagos and the Duesenbergs and the Bugatti Type 57s at Pebble Beach. Now it's fighting to stay afloat in a market overrun by muscle cars when that's all anyone wants. And the same thing is true of the 1957 Ford Thunderbird. It hasn't fallen quite as precipitously, but they're worth less now than they were 10 years ago, and they were worth less 10 years ago than they were 20. So this is an example of something that seems like a blue chip investment that basically evaporated. Or look at something like gold. People get wrapped around the axle about gold. Only recently, this year, has gold reattained its 1981 inflation-adjusted high. If you got into gold in 81, you just broke even.
Gold was $2,700 in January of this year.
Yeah, so think about that. If you thought gold was a great buy because of how much it's gone up, keep in mind that people thought that in 1981, 3 years before I was born. And if you'd put your money in stock, you'd be a rich man today. But if you put your money in gold, you've just broken even. But Armand, let's go back to this idea of things that seem like a solid investment that actually lose value with time. We talked about these 50s cars that are kind of out of style now. That's true with watches too.
Yeah. One thing that these items all have in common is that they are all subject to the cyclical nature of style and fashion. And all style, all fashion, all design is cyclical to a certain nature. You know, we'll end up back in the 1920s and 30s Art Deco when it comes to buildings. We'll end up back into the, you know, postmodern futurism of the, you know, 1950s and 60s. It's just how it is. And I think, you know, if you look at over a long enough time period, you know, these things will show their cycles again. You know, I'm not saying that, you know, the geezer watch craze is going to bring back bubble backs at the rate that they were. However, this is another arm of that same galaxy, so to speak.
Yeah, I would also mention that there have been fashionable watches that seemed like real moneymakers that became the Buick Skylark. So let's consider the original collectible watches. In the late 70s, early 80s, the entire collector market was built around pocket watches. Nobody wanted wristwatches. 1969 JLC Polaris in 1979 was just an old watch. And all the auctions were built around pocket watches, preferably complicated pocket watches. By the time the 90s arrived, there is a surge in interest in Rolex bubble backs. That market came, it went, and it's never recovered. And I feel that with now about 25 years of subsequent history, we can decisively declare that that market will never be what it was in the halcyon days of the 90s. So this has happened recently as well. Now, you've been doing this for at least a decade, right?
Yep.
Okay, so let's go back to 2014, 2015. At the time, the rock stars, the up-and-coming rock stars of the auction circuit, vintage Hoyer and early Longa.
Oh, yeah.
And they were going nowhere but up.
Yep.
And about a year, 2 years later, the bottom had fallen out.
And that is something that happened pretty fast with the with that end of the market. It did have a very quick cycle, but my gosh, I remember Altavia GMTs and Chronos going for crazy numbers.
Yeah, Carrera, Chronodates, Ottavias, Monacos. It seemed like, you know, Solinars and things like that. I don't know if it was just driven by blogs like Hodinkee.
I think absolutely, actually, because that's the golden era of internet watches, right? Your you know, Rolex forums was all the top of the top of the top. Hodinkee was at its best. You know, you had Ariel doing amazing work. He still does at a blog to watch, but amazing work during that time period. And you had this was also the beginning of watch influencers. So Watch Anish,
Yeah.
Watch Anish was, you know, going all over the place, going to the Beauvais factory, going to the Jacob & Co factory. So you had this explosion of online watch stuff going on during that time. And I think that drove so much of that specific market.
It's true. That was just before watches migrated to social media. They were still on forums and magazine sites and blogs. That's where you get the sudden surge of interest in, you know, 1990s Longa. A lot of that was being propelled by Hodinkee and blogs like it at the time. Now, Watch a Niche was revving up at that point, but it was also fairly unique. When you talked about wristwatch influencers on social media, there weren't 200 of them. It was a handful of like kind of watch glitterati guys. It was really the blogs and the forums that were driving this in 2014, 2015. Now, when was the last time you saw a huge auction result for an old Longa? Not saying it doesn't happen, but it's not auction cover type stuff anymore.
It's not, you know, and it's funny seeing, because, you know, Longa is one of those pockets of value that people don't expect to be such a pocket of value, but you can get amazing complications from Longa at a discount to their retail pricing. And I mean, look at the auction results as of late. It all tracks, all shows the same.
You know, the other thing too that's worth mentioning is that we have seen these cyclical ups and downs. We've also seen the bottom fall out. So we were talking about vintage Hoyer, Universal Genève, older Longa pieces. But keep in mind that we also saw initial crushes of demand for watches that ultimately weren't able to sustain the momentum. So the Omega dark side of the moon, and the next year, the gray side in 2013 and 2014, for a split second, Omega chronographs had Rolex Daytona-like buzz. And there were wait lists, and there were people paying markups online. And instead of becoming the second generation Silver Snoopy, by about 2-3 years later, it was just another old watch.
Yeah.
So, you can get those watches all day long, am I right, for under $10,000?
Yep.
Yeah, and they retail for far over that. The Silver Snoopy 2, no one saw that coming. The gray side of the moon, the dark side of the moon, those were surefire investments back in 2013, 14, 15. And where are we now? The Silver Snoopy's worth as much as a substantial car, and you can get gray sides and dark sides all day long. So if you got into one of those watches thinking you were going to flip it and you didn't move it immediately, you lost a lot of money on that.
Yeah, that is the other scale, the time, the holding time. How long am I going to hold this for? How long am I going to, quote unquote, ride the market on whatever hot watch it is that I have?
Yeah, and let's talk about a case where, okay, so this is a tale of two watches. But back in 2013, the hottest watch in dealer circles was the new this is the hottest Panerai here. Back when Panerai still had some street cred. It was the PAM 526 Regatta timer.
Oh yeah, that was hot for a while.
Cool watch. Initially, they were saying it was going to be limited production, not limited edition, but limited production, and they were going to offer it in the United States first. There were markups everywhere. There were people trying to get rich on that watch. I got an allocation. Hallelujah. I'm a rich man. Jet ski, here I come. And now, whether you want a 526 or the 1526, they're available all day long. Even more extreme example, Panerai again. 2005, Panerai is at the peak of its popularity. And it's now been domesticated by Richemont. Angelo Bonatti is firing on all cylinders. The brand could not be stronger. It's finally become a genuine international sensation. It's not just about guys on a forum. And they launched the PAM 203. Powered by an Angelus SF240 8-day movement. They called it the legitimate revival of the original 1950s 6152 combat watch. And I believe it was 50,000, and very shortly thereafter on secondary markets, 150,000. So if you paid 150,000 in pre-inflation money for this used in 2005, Armand, is it safe to say you'd have maybe a $60,000 watch today?
I wish it were safe to say that. I think I don't know that an end user would pay that today necessarily.
No, I think that's an ambitious ask by a seller.
Yeah.
And the transaction price is lower. So if you were to just inflation adjust 150 grand from 20 years ago, I'm not even going to do the math. It's a ton of money. But the bottom line is that this seemed like a can't miss. This was something so special and so limited, 150 pieces, presumably constrained by the number of authentic Angelus movements still available, and people were spending real estate money for this. In the subprime era, this was prime real estate.
And, to echo something similar of this time, not an auction grabber and not an outrageously expensive watch, but to kind of, again, pinpoint this time, the Super Avenger was very hard to get at retail during this time.
That is impossible. That is impossible to imagine today.
Very hard to get. And, this was before the time that things really, quote unquote, traded for over, other than very special things like this, obviously. The Super Avenger was trading at and slightly above its retail price.
So you're saying that if you went into a dealer, you might have to get an allocation for a Super Avenger?
You would not be leaving that same day with a Super Avenger. A 48 millimeter Avenger, you can't leave with it because it was the hottest watch on the planet. Hey, this one has a diamond bezel. Even hotter.
There we go.
Crazy times. Looking back, it's hilarious.
The kind of guy who would want a 48 millimeter Super Avenger probably would want diamonds on the bezel.
The more things, the merrier.
The same guy in the same period probably wanted the Royal Oak Offshore Shack and the one with the diamonds at that. But so my point here is that tastes change. And we're getting back to how hard it is to market a watch. So, okay, you want to sell watches out of your house. You want to make it a money-making hobby. Let's say you don't think it's going to replace your business. You're a law partner. You're a specialist, in orthopedic surgery. You're not going to quit your day job, but you think you're going to do this because it's going to be supplementary income. You think it's a side hustle and you're going to get ahead, even if it's just a little bit at a time. Tastes change so quickly that if you were trying to move that Super Avenger or that Royal Oak Offshore Shack, it could very easily have stretched out years. And you would be so underwater on that thing that if you were counting on a profit, you would literally have no hope to recoup even your basic. You would not break even.
None. Not even close.
And this is important because you can't tell what's going to be collectible. I remember back when the FP Journe Elegant 48 came out in 2016, it was soft launched by FP Journe because they genuinely had reservations about selling a larger non-diamond encrusted version of a lady's watch. And it was such a soft launch that other than a photo and a name, I had trouble finding any information about it in early 2016. And they were giving them away. To valued clients, it was like a door prize for spending a certain amount of money, and you could get it for free just by showing up.
And little known tidbit about Elegante. There was rumor of a smart perpetual calendar prototype being built by Journe that never came to market, unfortunately. But gosh, I think about that a lot. I think about that watch a lot.
Funny thing, there was also a Rolex, and it was a Oyster Quartz Day-Date prototype with a perpetual calendar.
Yep.
I've seen it. I've seen it in person, and it works. I know it exists. It's real.
Where have you seen that in person?
It was James Dowling Dubai Watch Week 2021.
Oh my gosh.
It's real. I've seen it. So my point is, everyone was so sure the PAM 526 was going to be a moneymaker, and even Journe itself was ambivalent about marketing the Elegant 48, which, according to recent results, I've seen some people pay $100,000 for them, and that's, I think, well documented.
Yeah, very well documented. It's crazy to me,
which is almost 10 times what it cost when it came out.
And I think too, like, I'm no stranger to markets and rarity and, swings of things, don't get me wrong, but it's just crazy when you see what you can get also for the prices of an Elegante. I mean, there are swatches of perpetual calendar. Pateks you can buy perpetual longas, you can buy, I mean, I don't want to be hyperbolic, but damn near any Vacheron you want, any Breguet. You can buy a Breguet complicated tourbillon. You can get the coolest of the cool things that no one has or looks at.
You know what?
Or you can have the Elegante at 100.
Exactly. And let me see if I can find this.
And I like the Elegante. It's a fun watch to me. But it's crazy that it's that expensive, but I do like it.
Okay, so crazy thought right now. I have a Jaeger-LeCoultre Master Grand Tradition Grand Complication. This watch, which is equipped with a sky chart, zodiac, annual calendar, flying tourbillon, synthetic escapement, trebuchet hammer minute repeater, and let me see what else am I missing here. Sidereal time, guilloche, lacquering, white gold case. All of this is going to cost less than you would pay for that used time-only quartz Journe watch, which, by the way, is not constrained by Journe's production limits that are applied to the mechanical watches.
No, little known fact there also.
So my point here is that you can have a grand complication from IWC. And actually, I'm going to tell you exactly what this grand complication watch from JLC, 75-piece limited editions could be like $135,000 in a world where a Elegant is now a $100,000 watch. You could almost have a JLC grand complication. So you could absolutely have an IWC grand complication for like $80,000 to $90,000.
Put into that perspective, it's just so crazy. It really, really is.
And so what I'm saying here is not only did nobody see this coming, including Journe itself, but for the same kind of money, you could buy a watch that would be more enjoyable to own. Like, I'm not talking about a watch that's easy to sell. If you get an allocation for an Elegant, of course you could easily flip it. But what would you rather have? Some quartz watch in kind of a frilly dress style, or something that's honest to God made and finished by artists?
Yeah, what do you like more? And honestly, your answer might be the Elegante. I will say, though, if that is your answer, maybe reevaluate what you're interested in the watch world at that point.
I would definitely say broaden your horizons a little bit, not because you got the wrong answer, just because
No, there is no wrong answer.
You might find something more fun for the same money. You might even find 8 or 9 watches for the same money.
Yeah. Easily.
That's a great collection of zeniths. So I would also say there's other things to keep in mind. This is why, I always warn people about trying to sell watches for a profit, because Another trait that seems to unify people who think they can flip watches successfully is their relative inexperience with recessions and sustained economic downturns. So think about this. If you're 45 now, then you were 29 years old when the last sustained U.S. recession ended. That's a period when most people are still trying to get careers, put together family life, and achieve home ownership. If you're 40 now, then, well, you were 24 years old and barely out of college last time we had a real business cycle downturn. I'm not talking about the 2-month COVID recession. I'm talking about a business cycle downturn that stretched over parts of 3 years. So a great deal of watch collectors trying to trade watches like boomtown assets are people who either weren't old enough to have meaningful exposure to the 2007 to 2009 financial crisis, or they were so young that they had no choice. They couldn't have any exposure to it. They had no skin in the game because they weren't established. Many of these speculators have known nothing but a bull market in stocks dating back to June 2009. Again, there's that 2-month blip in 2020, but we were all hunkered down and protected by the government. So this is a bull market frenzy that continues now for, I guess, maybe half the lifetime of some of the youngest people who are now talking about flipping watches. Just keep that in mind. In other words, these are people who've never been wiped out. They've never seen a real recession, a black swan, or a sustained downturn. Stocks, house prices, risk assets, commodities have only gone up in value. They've never seen a business cycle downturn when luxuries are impossible to move.
And I mean, it's crazy to think about this, but we look back at, old sales records. We look back at the prices of things in '09, and oh my gosh, I mean, even just according to the market the year before, wild cut downs. It is crazy night and day, and it's just due to there literally not being a market.
Yeah, and this is important to mention because if you have the liquidity and the stability and the established clientele, you can always ride out a recession. That's why big car dealers tend to not go under during a recession. Think about your local Mercedes dealer, your local BMW dealer. They've probably survived multiple downturns because they have a clientele, they have customers on a call list at the ready, in and out stream of people leasing and returning leases. They've got many different ways to create revenue, from service to leases to outright sales, trades, taking stuff they trade and sending them to wholesale auctions. They've got a lot of revenue sources. They're established, and they've got a recession-proof business to an extent. Now, if you're a guy who does not have the liquidity to sit on your inventory for 2 years while losing in the process, you probably shouldn't be in the watch business, because that's exactly where every professional dealer was from 2007 to 2009.
And even in different aspects of quote unquote bull or bear markets, we'll see pockets of rising and falling. I think I've told this story on the pod before, but friend of the company, friend of the family, friend of every living creature in the world, CQ. When he was in Dubai, he met with a gentleman who had a briefcase full of 50th anniversary APs, and this gentleman bought these watches on loan, which is not something that a lot of people in the Middle East do. It's a bit of a faux pas, from what I understand. And CQ had to deliver the news that they were worth significantly under his cost. And that was during a boom in the market. The 50th anniversary of the Royal Oak, things were looking up, things were going up.
If you had that rotor on your Royal Oak, you were a baller.
And then that is one of the quickest train turnarounds that I've seen, actually, in this industry, the 50th anniversary APs.
And I think one of the primary reasons was they weren't particularly
different.
Exclusive.
They had a rotor. They had a rotor, Tim.
They made a lot of them.
Yeah.
It's not like there was any shortage of supply.
Yeah, they had a rotor and a reference number, and that's what was different.
And here's the thing. Again, if you think you can make some money selling your collection privately, go for it. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm not saying don't buy and sell watches yourself, and I'm definitely not saying you have to work through a dealer. I'm saying don't pretend to be a dealer. I'm not trying to steer your business our way. I'm saying that if you're going to do this, Coming from a dealer's perspective, I know what it takes to set this up and keep it sustainable. And I've done it at every scale, from Watch You Want down in Florida when it was a few people in a room to 600 employees in 20 locations around the world at Watchbox. If you think you're going to scale like that because someone you know was able to flip a high-end watch and made money, you got to have really realistic expectations and realize how hard it is to market something yourself in a market where liquidity is minimal. Again, you may be showing your highly collectible watch and sending people your bank numbers for 2 years before someone finally sends the wire. That's a hard pill to swallow. Now, if you're a collector and you just enjoy owning these things, that's not a problem. But if you see this as a business model, you got to realize that we do a couple of thousand watches a year. And Armand, I'm sure you can confirm this. For every deal that goes through, there's probably 10 people who nibble and disappear.
Oh man, 10's an understatement. Yeah. I mean, it's it's not shooting fish in a barrel. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, if you have 20 people calling outbound for 100 minutes a day, like cold calls, okay, maybe you're going to do all right. But if you have a full-time job and you've got these watches, so you're a high-powered dude or dudette, you're a doctor, you're a lawyer, you're some sort of financier, you may find you don't have enough time to devote to actually getting fair value and following up all these leads that come in through Chrono 24.
A question I ask often, because we try to consult. If somebody has a watch that they're interested in selling, I'll give an offer and then say, hey, I think you can sell it privately for this amount more. And the next question is, well, how would I do that? Which I follow up with how much do you value your own time? And that is a majorly important question to ask, because you're right. If you value your own time, you're not going to want to spend your time doing this.
Yeah. Time is money. You want to sell quickly, you're probably going to take a loss. You want to get full value, it's going to take a while. And it's going to take working the phone. It's probably not just going to miraculously come in. People also wind up having suspicion of stuff that's listed for too long.
Yeah.
If they can see how old your listing is, they will reflexively move away from it. Or they'll think they have you over a barrel and they'll lowball you. So that's something to keep in mind.
And oftentimes, especially with a private sale, they're right. Because sometimes, guess what? You just want to get the thing away from you.
And also, let's think about this. Let's look at some of the people who might do this. What are they up against? Well, they're up against the fact that we're now in a world where there are no secrets. So if you want to sell your watch, anyone can check auctions, eBay, dealer sites, and Chrono 24. You're not going to get all the money if people realize that there are a lot of competitors with the same watch. And there's not going to be any mystery about what it's worth. If if enough people have posted asks, then you're not going to get substantially above what another person is asking. And if you don't price it above what someone else is asking, how do you know you're even going to get ahead? So it's not like you're going to buy the $5 JLC at Goodwill and realize it's worth $40,000 and sell it to Eric Koo or whatever that story was. I just referenced that
story, actually.
That doesn't happen in the real world. There's a reason that makes the news. You don't see that story every day.
There's a reason Goodwill now has a fully dedicated eBay department.
Exactly. So again, you're up against a level playing field of a lot of people who have the same watch and the same idea. I would also say flipping exotic watches is hard to do consistently because they're highly identifiable and low volume. So supply is just a trickle. It's like, how many Journe black labels do you think you're going to get this year? How many engraved and enameled Patek Philippe's? Even if you did just flip it, how much of a business model is there around getting 1 or 2 watches a year? And why go through all that trouble when you could just put the same amount of money into NVIDIA stock?
Well, and that's the thing too. If you're flipping 1 to 2 watches a year, these are also presumably watches that are difficult to get, and you're also presumably burning the bridge of the relationship that you got them from.
Yeah, that's why I say they're identifiable. And don't think for a second that your dealer or the brand itself won't ghost shop you.
Yeah.
If I see something, if I'm the Imperious brand chieftain of a large Geneva luxury outfit, and I see something that's a minute repeater that I personally evaluated before it left the factory for a client who was vetted by his dealer and approved for sale by yours truly, I'm definitely going to ask somebody to make a phone call on that listing.
Yeah.
And you're going to get cut off. And if that's fine, if you're going to play the game to win once, well, anyone can, it's like game theory. It's like, Nash game theory. if you're going to play the game once and you defect and break the rules, it might be your advantage once, but you can't build a model of consistent success around that, because if the game is iterated, the next time people know what you're about and they're on to you.
Yep.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, high-end watches that require an allocation or special approval, it's usually just a trickle, and you will get caught and burned. So if you're just divesting of your watches and you're like, burn it all, I'm selling it, fine. But if you want to get back into the market, you will be caught.
Yes, you will. The brands are out there. They are looking for people flipping.
And I would say this flipping mainstream watches, you might think, oh, well, I'm buying from a brand that makes 1 million watches a year, so they're not going to individually catch me. And that's probably true. But the problem is there's a lot of people who have the same idea. So you've got some desirable steel ceramic bezel chronograph, and you get the allocation, you take delivery, you pay retail, you put it up on the internet. Well, objectively, these are not uncommon things. So you're going to go on Chrono or eBay and you're going to find a whole lot of watches just like yours, priced the same way. And do you want to be butting heads with 500 other dealers and guys who had the same idea? Probably going to be hard to get away with that. Unless you're Francis Ford Coppola, you're eventually going to get cut off from all of these brands. The high volume, the low volume, anything that requires an allocation, approval, you're going to get cut off. And he's the exception because I think he's a rock star. But at almost 87 years old, he might be thinking, you know what? If I do get cut off for selling my Journe FFC, who cares? I'm 87.
Journe responded to that saying, here at Journe, we are thrilled to support the arts and we support this. And I thought that was really cool, actually. I really like that.
Right answer.
Right answer. And I think... for one thing, Coppola's Coppola. I mean, come on. Like, how cool is that? It's the black hand. It's amazing. It's great. I am admittedly bummed out that FFC had to liquidate his watch collection to make up for Megalopolis. That's a bit of a bummer to me. Not that I really thought Megalopolis was going to be a blockbuster, but it's a bummer for a prolific artist such as FFC to have to do that to support himself at this point in his career.
Yeah, I mean, I know at one point he owned a Tucker 48, so if he's just cleaning house, I would love to pick that one up. I don't think I've got the firepower to buy that at auction, though. But I would also say this. If you're Journe, it's the politic thing to say, but also think about this. FFC, selling his FFC, is probably going to be a market-setting event for the Journe brand. So the value the brand gains from this outstrips any disappointment that the guy is selling a custom watch.
Yep.
Like there is no world in which this isn't hugely beneficial to the Journe brand's image and market equity. So of course he's happy. It's not like somebody's flipping an Elegant. It's going to be an event. It's going to be like when Paul Newman's Daytona went
Very
up for
much
sale.
so. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Absolutely. And I mean, this is the guy who was a part of the design, who the watch is named for. I mean,
He was the godfather of that watch.
I almost had a hiccup and I couldn't even laugh. I needed that. Thank you.
My pleasure. I do this for a living.
I think too, it'll be curious to see where that goes in comparison with the Only Watch FFC.
It will be interesting because it's so different. Only Watch is a regular occurrence, and the market's ready for it. This is a weird out-of-sequence type deal, and also the watch is one of one. There are other FFCs out there, but there's only one like this. So I think there's a good chance this will be the most expensive Journe ever sold. And yeah, so that's sort of where that is. But that's, oddly enough, that's the kind of event that gets people thinking about stuff they've got.
Yep.
And even though there is no comparison between Dude with 5 Journes and FFC, he seems to be thinking, oh my gosh, look at that. I've got 5 Journes. That could be me. Well, no, it can't. But the important thing to remember here is that it's also very hard to price something if you don't have the benefit of a pricing history that's public. So think about this. Low volume, small data set. For a lot of small fries, there's this temptation to convert preferential access into quick cash. But realistically, how do you know what to ask when a lot of the stuff that's sold is mostly sold without publicly listed prices? Like, there might be plenty of above market sales, but these are the kind of watches that even if they're advertised publicly, it's usually price on request.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you also have to ask, like, what is acceptable wholesale versus resale? So wholesale is what a dealer pays for a watch. Retail is going to be what you would get whether you're selling it, you're selling it new from a dealer, you're a dealer, or you're selling it privately, pre-owned. But that's the idea that it's the end user's price retail, whether it's new or used.
And that's a really interesting kind of subsect of the market, is where pieces are liquid to other dealers, where what brands dealers will work on sub 20 points, sub 15 points, I mean in some cases sub 10 points. And where dealers will openly say, yes, I'll buy that from you, but I'm going to make my money on it. You know?
So it's not going to be as much as you think. If you want to move it fast, it's not going to be as much as you think.
It's not.
And there are certified pre-owned programs out there that will not certify a watch that's too new, for the obvious reason that they don't want to
Encourage
incite flipping. Exactly. Also, I would say this: a lot of people have the same idea. So if you've got something that adds value, like the benefit of hosting a charity auction, people will open up their pockets for that, or the opportunity to receive a piece unique at auction, or the sale of something that's historically important, like, I don't know,
Like the Star Caliber.
yeah, the Star Caliber 2000, or a Patek Philippe Caliber 89, or you've got a first series 2499 that was owned by Eric Clapton and it's steel or something like that. Yeah, it's easier to leverage that than something that's mass produced and generic. Also, I would say this: service is a time bomb. And particularly if you think you can buy something below market and flip it, this is where you really get into danger. When you're buying used stuff and you think you can turn it quickly, well, you might get the watch and realize it doesn't run. And if that's Audemars Piguet, FP Journe, Greubel Forsey, you could be looking at an overhaul in the 5-figure range easily.
Easily. Very, very, very easily. We've seen overhauls, outrageous overhauls from all brands. But yes, it's funny. The higher end pieces quickly get into the 5 figures for service.
Especially if it's something that's very complicated or very delicate, or both. So keep in mind, most dealers have economies of scale in service, operations, parts, repair. They have ways of not mitigating the service issue, but not allowing it to spike the ball. Like service by a large dealer, they'll understand, because they'll take the watch and it'll go through an intake process. I can't tell you how many watches I've seen from small dealers that are delivered, with 180 degrees of balance amplitude, or they're losing 50 seconds a day.
Yeah, we talk about ourselves a lot, obviously, but this is part of the reason we have a generally 3 to 5 day inspection process, because we test amplitude, we test power reserve, we test timekeeping. We warranty our watches. Guess what? I don't want you to have to make a warranty claim. That's a bummer.
Yeah, can you water test a dive watch in your house? I'm just throwing that out there.
We can in our house.
Yes, we can. And in order to have parts and service accounts with some of these brands, you have to have the equipment that can do that, which is not generic to watchmaking.
Their equipment.
And I would also say this. Let me dispel probably the biggest rumor about being a large commercial watch dealer. Flippers are not the backbone of our business.
No. Oh, my gosh. And really, really good bullet point to bring up, because that is something that's toted on forums, online, in comments a lot.
And that's true of every watch dealer that sells pre-owned at scale. Most of the time, you're dealing with watches that are years or decades old. Most of the time, you're dealing with clients who are not looking to make an enormous amount of money. They're looking for some degree of liquidity. In the same sense that you sell your BMW, 328i convertible, you're just trying to get some cash for it. You don't think you're coming out ahead there. But you've got to sell it to someone, because you're just listing it and showing it to people at your house can be an uncomfortable situation. So, you'll sell it to CarMax. Well, go to CarMax, look around. Do you see Lamborghini V12s? Do you see Ferrari, like hypercars like F80s, LaFerraris, Enzos? What do you see? Do you see Porsche GT3 RSs at CarMax? No, you mostly don't. Maybe in DuPont's registry, and then those dealers are all around the country. So yeah, if you're a large-scale commercial car dealer, you're going to find that most of your cars are, sold by retail buyers They're purchased at wholesale. They're reconditioned in ways that are responsible and professional, and then they're sold probably at a lower profit margin than if you weren't inspecting them thoroughly and providing, pre-sale service to each car that goes out. So if you're a large commercial watch dealer, flippers are not the backbone of your business, because that's a boom and bust. I'm telling you not to be the flipper because it's not sustainable, and you don't want to be further up the food chain from the flipper as a business model, because that business model in turn at the dealer level will not be successful. That will not last.
Right. If the the minnows that you're feeding no longer eat, then you're no longer eating.
Exactly. If the minnows die, then the tuna die. If the tuna die, the shark dies, and if the shark dies, eventually the killer whale dies. And that's sort of why you don't want to be downstream from flippers as a large commercial going concern in the watch space.
And not to mention just the relationships with the brands being very important. The brands will close you if you notably sell to flippers. They will.
Yeah, if you're an authorized dealer, if you have that other component to your business, then you certainly don't want to provoke brands. But the other thing too is even if you just do used watches, you're not going to sustain your business based on guys who are just serial gamblers.
This is probably more on the primary side of things, but this is something that's not talked about all that often that I try to bring up to our team a lot. Still, to this day, the majority of retail watch buyers buy and forget. They're not necessarily thinking of, hey, I have this value on my wrist. Sure, are they going to walk around saying, yeah, this is a $5,000 watch, but what they mean is I spent $5,000 on this. A lot of people really don't think of it as value after the fact, and that's something that I think might come as a shock to a lot of our listeners, even a lot of anybody who collects kind of in our space. But most buyers, most consumers of fine timepieces buy and forget.
Yeah, I would say a lot of people will not spend, like responsible collectors of means, they will not spend beyond the write-off value. Like they will not spend anything beyond what they can afford to straight up lose.
To lose, yes.
A watch might get lost, it might get destroyed, you might get robbed, your house could burn down. Like there are scenarios where if you're not comprehensively insured, you could absolutely write off the watch. Mm-hmm. And that's the responsible thing to do. Not spend any more money on a watch than you can afford to straight up lose, and then take any retained value as gravy. And that's a healthy attitude as a collector. I think the idea that you're even going to break even is probably very optimistic.
Yep.
It's just not as irresponsible and provocative as thinking you're going to be the equivalent of like a small day trader on the NASDAQ.
And again, we've said this before. I do feel like paying so much attention to the value takes away the enjoyment to a certain degree too. You're not going to wear the watch in the same way carefree or as carefree if you're worried about maintaining value.
Yeah, that's where you get all these watches that are still triple sealed, or they're covered in stickers, or they've got some disgusting caked decal on the case back from 10 years
that
ago.
Nobody wants.
And the guy thinks that makes the watch, literally worth a fortune. You're not going to enjoy the watch, and you're really not going to give yourself any advantage on the resale side. Even if you've got a watch that's like new in box, a serious collector knows that if he's not buying that from a dealer, it's not new in box.
No.
And he won't pay the price for it. As soon as it leaves the dealer, it's like driving a car off the lot. 1 mile down the road, 25% less value.
Yep.
So, and that's not a function of condition. That's a function of new versus used status. So just consider that. Let me just say, if you want to sell watches and you want to be a flipper and you want to be a commercial watch vendor, I'm not saying don't. And I really have no personal stake in this. The idea that someone selling watches out of his house is going to be a competitor to this or any large-scale enterprise is about as unlikely as a person who is, selling gas out of his barn competing with, Chevron. It's like, more power to you if you can make that work. I've got a lot of friends who are small-scale dealers, and
Likewise.
I would say that what sets them apart from all the failures who've tried the same thing is that they'll become very expert in one type of watch, and then they'll exclusively buy and sell that. Or they will be content to tread water and just experience a diversity of watches over the years. Basically, treating it as a sort of running watch collection that's always in the midst of turnover so they can experience all these things and maybe have, $20 million worth of watches over a period of 30 years without actually being out $20 million. So they're almost like break-even models.
Yeah.
Or they focus on a certain type of customer. Like you are based out of Singapore and you've just got your finger right on the heartbeat of the market and you're just going to buy and sell in Singapore and you're going to own that space. That's fine. And, particularly in vintage, I would say the small scale specialist is probably the dominant model in the marketplace now.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone, if you're looking, 10 past 10, the Eric Kuz of the world, Eric Wind, all these people are super specialized. They know what they're doing. They're not looking to sell 3,000 watches a year. And frankly, that is the right model for selling vintage.
I totally agree. And like to echo what Tim says, pick a lane. It's one of those things that if you have a specialty, you're more interesting as a dealer to collectors than the guy who does everything, because you're going to have a more specialized, information set in your brain with your specific avenue of dealing, and you're going to be able to service your clientele better that way.
Yeah, and you're going to understand what to buy and what to charge based on that experience. And vintage doesn't work if you're doing thousands of watches a year. So, you look at a company like ours, vintage is part of what we do, but it's not the backbone of our business model because it can't be. The watches are idiosyncratic. Each one is different from the last. And when every watch is an individual judgment call, how do you teach sales associates to be a specialist only in 50s LeCoultre? How do you have a guy who only does Universal Genève from the 60s? How do you have a guy whose only business is going to be Oris but pre-quartz crisis? That's the kind of thing that one dude does as a one-horse operation, and more power to him.
And we're thankful to have those guys out there.
I buy watches from those
Likewise.
people. So we're not saying don't do this. We're just saying that the small scale model works better for very specialized things. There's no way to serialize a stroke of luck like catching a giant bluefin tuna on your first attempt. You can't build a business model out of that. You can build a business model out of being the guy who sits on the dock waiting to buy the bluefin tuna, because somebody will always get lucky on any given day out on the fishing boats, and you want to be upstream of those people. And it's the same thing with vintage. When there is a 2447 Carrera on the market, you want to be the first guy to find it and make an offer, because that's your gig.
Yep.
Okay.
Well said.
Is there anything else left to say to people who think that they can either make money flipping, day trading watches, comparing watches to stock?
The last thing I'll say is I think it's hard to do part-time.
Yeah, I
think
agree.
It's really hard to do part-time. If you want to get into it, you got to get into it somewhere with some scaffolding. Don't do it alone at first. Learn, and you got to jump in full-time.
Yeah, until the day comes that you can buy an ETF based on watches, I think you're going to be in a position where it's a gamble, and it's a gambler's business. And for the same reason, many people have successful retirement plans based on stock through 401ks, but very few people make fortunes such that they can retire off of day trading. All of the advantages come with scale, and being at a large enough scale that you can peg back your margin a little bit. That's the model behind a hedge fund. That's the market. That's the model behind a mutual fund. That's the market behind sovereign wealth and pension funds. It's not to make all your money on a handful of big trades. It's to be mildly successful at scale over a really long time.
Consistently.
So I would say, I'm going to go a little bit off the beaten path here, Armand. If you really want to sell watches, buy and sell watches for a living, work for a big vendor first.
Yes.
Come here, interview, see what it takes. Do it for a year.
Know the nuances.
And once you've done it for a year, figure out whether you have the wherewithal to put up with all the tire kickers, all of the scams, all of the endless phone talk that's really just a guy who wants company, all of the people who try to burn you because they're operators too, and all of the watches that come in and are not as stated when you bring them in for evaluation. Go through that for a year. And then if you're still charged up about it, then you're 1 in 100.
Man, I didn't even think of the outside dealer competition. That's a whole nother, yeah.
So yeah, go work for a dealer for a year. They're always looking for people to work sales. Trust me, always. and see if you can do this yourself. And if you can do it, some people have used that as a springboard to a career, but most haven't.
Yeah.
I would say for every Armand, and I don't work in sales and I've never sold a watch, for every Armand, there's literally 50 people who don't stick.
Yeah, without a doubt. No, it's hard. And to echo your sentiment about going with a big dealer, it gives you a wide range of everything. So, what we were saying earlier about having a specific kind of avenue, this will give you experience in many an avenue and know which one you want to pick, where your specialty can be, and to Tim's point, show you if you can do it.
And if nothing else, you'll learn more about watches in that year than you have learned in your entire life up to that point.
Without a doubt. Yes.
But remember that episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry David wanted to sell cars. How'd that work out? All right, guys, reach out to us, podcasts at the1916company.com. Your questions and topic suggestions. This is a democracy. We want to hear from you. Tim and Armand signing off, and until next time, time out.